I now give the floor to Dr. Peter Brown, Director of Economics for the Anthropocene Project at the McGill University, Canada, who will address us with his presentation entitled Economics for a Flourishing Earth. The floor is yours, Dr. Brown.
So I'm going, first, thank you to everyone for this invitation. Very, very deeply grateful for it and humbled by this opportunity. I'd like to speak about the role of economics in the way we proceed in thinking about the Earth and our relationship to it. So I'm hoping, yes, and it's going to start with this slide. No, we're good. So just to briefly summarize what I'll say is that the very fine aspirations that are involved in the talks that have been given and in this whole effort the goals will not be met if we continue to think about and operate the economic system in the way we do. And in particular, there is a complicity on the part of higher education in promulgating a model of the human-Earth relationship, which is deeply embedded in and deeply at fault with the decline in the prospects of life on Earth. There's a diagram on the screen taken from a standard economics textbook taught at many universities. There's probably about 3 to 4 million students in the United States who take a course based on this model, and many, many more around the world. And what's interesting about this model is not what it says, but what it doesn't say, because as you'll notice, it's different from a hotel room, which will always have a plug and a wastebasket, right? It always has a way of getting energy, and it has a way of disposing of the inevitable waste of human and the activity of other life forms. So this is a very, very problematical way to think about the way we provision ourselves. And it has a number of absurd assumptions, some of which have been spoken about already this morning. One is that everything in the universe except people is of instrumental value only. There's no sense at all in this model that other life forms or the well-being of the Earth's lakes and oceans and so forth is something that can be valued for its own sake. The second absurd assumption is that the economy is an isolated system, not connected to the biophysical reality of the laws or the laws of the universe. And this way of thinking and the way it's taught is, for the most part, not systematically connected to Earth system science. So we're really flying blind when we're using this system and the underlying models within it. And another absurd assumption is that we don't have to pay attention to distribution or fairness. So the economic model emphasizes economic efficiency, expansion of the economy, but gives little or no attention to its consequences for who gets what. There are a number of very detrimental consequences to this, which would take too long to enumerate them all. One is radical inequality. Inequality has risen dramatically and tragically around the globe, and within nations and between nations. This very vast amount of money that's in the hands of a very few people has facilitated the purchase of government and the destruction or weakening of democratic institutions. This process is destabilizing, the economic process is destabilizing the Earth's life support systems, the acidification of the ocean, the destruction of the stability of the climate, and so forth. Everybody knows this long and sad list. So there are two, just coming now to a more positive message. This is a diagram taken from a recent book by Kate Raworth called, the name of the book is Donut Economics. And in her conception of the economy, which received a very favorable review in The Guardian from George Monbiot, there's two things that the present economy lacks that she is calling attention to. One is the notion of planetary limits, that there are ways in which the economy can be simply too big for the Earth and its ecosystems and its life support systems. And these are designated in this diagram by the red sections where we've basically exceeded what seemed to be prudent limits to what we should do. And then the second thing, and the more innovative dimension of this, of her thinking, is to say, well, the economy has to operate between a ceiling and a floor, and the floor has to be defined by justice, by what people can require as their basic needs and their basic rights, such as education and water, and other elements of human health and dignity. So this is a very big step forward, but it doesn't go the whole way that people participating in this event, I think, would like to see it do, because it's still remaining mainly in the idea that the Earth is an object to be used, and doesn't take the step to thinking about the Earth not only holistically from a material point of view, but from an ethical and spiritual point of view. So what we need to do is to move to what I call Earth system economics, or simply Earth economics, where we think about the Earth as a holistic system in which the economy is operating fully embedded in these biophysical systems. And we are now approaching the ability, I believe, to model this and to think about an integration of global macroeconomic policy with global life support systems and with global principles of fairness. To really get to an economy for a flourishing Earth, I think we have to embrace at least 3 ethical principles. One, membership, just that we are part of we're members of the Commonwealth of Life. We're not masters of it. And we have to see ourselves as part of this community. Second, we have a duty of householding to care for the Earth as the home for life in this part of the universe. And we have a duty to see that that remains healthy and not to dispose of large amounts of material from the Earth's crust that would be harming to living systems, such as arsenic or concentration of heavy metals. And third, we have an obligation to use the Earth's life support systems and the things that make them possible, like sunlight, like fossil fuels and things like that, in an extremely parsimonious way in order to ensure the well-being of life far into the future, as well as life in the present. So the last couple of messages I just want to get across is there's a duty to, basically the goal of an economics system looked at this way is a mutually enhancing human-Earth relationship, a phrase that comes from Thomas Berry. My work is very influenced by his work. And I draw 3 consequences from this. One is we should operate with the notion of compassionate retreat. As in a battle that can't be won, you pull back from it, hopefully with minimal casualties on either side and with little damage, as little damage as possible to the landscape. And we should think about the human project that way. It's too big, it's too toxic, and the goal of the next few decades should be a reduction in the overall impact of humanity on the planet. Climate change is obviously completely urgent, and one way to address this is moving away from animal agriculture, which could make a big difference in our impact on the Earth, could spur reforestation, much cleaner water, less heart disease, cancer, and erosion. In other words, it would move us toward a mutually enhancing human-Earth relationship. And lastly, human beings are taking more and more of the Earth's surface, more and more of the fruits of the ocean, and we're crowding off the other species. And so if thinking about this as an element of compassionate retreat, we should move toward reduction of the human population by family planning, and with particular attention to the high consumption countries whose whose footprint is really large and unfair. And then lastly, we have to rediscover the sacredness of the Earth. George Santayana, the Spanish and American philosopher mentioned, should pay attention to the sources of our being and be respectful of them. It's a broadened version of honor your father and your mother, but we won't get where we want to go by philosophical argument or economic arguments alone. We have to rediscover this sacred place. Thank you.
I thank Dr. Peter Brown for his presentation. I now give the floor to Mrs. Linda Sheehan, Executive Director of Planet Pledge USA, who will address us with her presentation entitled The Role of Nature's Rights in Advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. The floor is yours, Mr. Sheehan. I now give the floor to the stakeholder number 3. Could you please introduce yourself? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jen Gabi. I'm from McGill University. I have a question for Peter Brown, Dr. Peter Brown. I'd like to hear more about your point on refining the sacredness and how we do this, how this sort of more religious form of social change can happen in a way that doesn't echo sort of Christian missionary work and the problems related to that. So how do you promote a religious concept? Thank you.
Yes. Professor Brown, please, could you answer? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It's difficult, of course, to imagine it, but there was a reference earlier in the discussion today to Einstein's wisdom on some things which are, of course, enormous. One of the things he mentioned was the illusion of that the separateness of the human self is an illusion, right? It's a very useful illusion, and many other species of animals and perhaps plants have it also. But the goal of becoming a mature person is to know and to feel the full embeddedness of our lives in our surroundings, and that we are wholly dependent on that, and to merge the conception of the human self with basically with the self of the universe, if you want to think about it that way, that we're part of this vast network. And that wisdom is to appreciate this and to understand it. And as I referred to briefly to George Santayana, he referred to this as piety, as respect for the sources of our being. And I think that the things that we heard earlier in this conversation about indigenous and traditional peoples, there's a deep wisdom there that we in the West fail to tap and to understand. And so I think learning from these cultures is essential, really, to the continuation of not only our life, but the lives of other creatures on this earth. Thank you again for the question.